Hello and welcome to the 47th episode of the Select Characters Podcast. I'm Sam Yates. I'm here to be your host this week on a magical journey through the world of video games. I've got some friends here with me. I've got Ryan Dildine.
Hey.
And Enrique Cancel.
Woo, spring break!
Spring break, 2016. Very cool. Chris isn't here. He's starring on MTV's The Grind for spring break this week. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be super hot. They've got DJ Scribble and Pauly Shore showed up, is what I heard.
Oh, man.
So that's very exciting. It's spring break, 2002?
Would it be a MTV spring break without it?
That's right. That's a fact. Not without the wheeze. Let's move on forward and let's talk a little bit about what we've been playing this week. And it has, of course, been another excellent week for video games. You already know. Let's talk a little bit about what we have been playing. Let's start with Enrique. What you been playing this week?
Ooh, I actually went back and started playing Banner Saga because I realized that Banner Saga 2 is going to be coming out sometime this year, I believe. Actually, within the next month, I think.
That's cool. I know we've already heard a lot of thoughts about Banner Saga. What made you go back? Because you've already finished it, right?
Yeah. And that's one of those, I always do that whenever there's a sequel coming out, that I always do just as a refresher, just to kind of familiarize myself with the mechanics and then just get a little bit more background on the story. Especially with Banner Saga, because it's one of those games that's a continuation. Like, I think it's supposed to be a trilogy where the events from Banner Saga 1 will be getting ported to 2 and so forth. So I figure I want to make sure that now that I have the experience and knowing how to play, I can go back and get the story that I wanted. If that makes sense.
Which is to say that your own events and your own choices are what carry forward, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So yeah, but I mean it's fun and I like the game. I know we've already talked about it before. I'm a really big fan of like the turn-based tactics game, so that was a blast. But doing that and then just going back and playing like little random indie games. I did Darkest Dungeon, Endless Legends, just stuff like that I've had in my backlog.
Cool. Yeah, Darkest Dungeon is out now, right?
Yeah, officially. So dude, they added some really cool new creatures and stuff, and the heart attack mechanic is actually really neat. I like it now.
That's awesome.
Yeah, for anybody that hasn't played it, the big gimmick of the game is that your characters, as you go through like the dungeon crawl, they get stressed, and the stress builds up, and it can have like negative effects on your party. They'll get like random debilitations. I think I had a couple guys get like the kleptomania, which means like whenever you loot treasure, there's a chance that they'll take it from themselves, so you won't loot it for the group. There's one of them that was a masochist, so he wouldn't accept healing from anybody, and he would also damage himself before turns. So it's like really cool stuff like that. But other than that, like the stress mechanic was never really too much of a hindrance. You know, you can kind of just power through it. But they added a heart attack mechanic now that if your stress gets too high, you go into like this danger zone, and if it fills out, your character will actually have a heart attack and die. So now you have like a reason to kind of be wary of it.
That's cool. I don't know if I played it enough when I played it earlier. It seemed hard, but not in a way that was interesting. So I'm not sure. I'm sure they've changed a lot and they've balanced a lot. But that was kind of the impression I got from last time. I did want to play it again after it came out for full release, though.
Yeah, it feels like they balanced it a lot more, too. And especially with like the whole stress mechanic in general. There's even a really cool, they added some new, I guess, classes and stuff. And there's a new class, which is I guess like a monster that when he attacks, he can actually metamorph into a demon. But doing so will actually do like a huge amount of stress increase on your party. So
yeah, that would freak me out a little bit.
Yeah, okay, I figure. But it's kind of cool though because it's a really heavy hitter, but at the same time you have to kind of manage like, do I really want to use this gun or do I want to tough it out? So it's pretty neat.
That sounds cool. I think I might jump back into that and see what it's all about. Anything else?
No, it's just pretty much that. And then Stardew Valley, which I don't know, man. I had a really big addiction to Harvest Moon, and Stardew Valley is kind of the same thing.
It's definitely kind of the same thing.
Oh, yeah, pretty much. So, I don't know, dude. I've been like just sitting there farming and not walking away. It's bad. I have 158 hours on it already.
Wow. That's a lot of Stardew Valley.
Yeah, from just a stupid week, so yeah.
Yeah.
You played 115 hours in a week?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Dude,
are there that many hours?
I'm telling you, I don't know. I don't know what to do.
Whoa.
Yeah, that seems like a lot. I'm just going to do this here real quick. Let's just...
Maybe not. Maybe it's within 2 weeks. I don't know.
There are 168 hours in a week, so I'm not saying...
Okay, so it's probably within 2 weeks.
2 weeks because we didn't do the game club last week.
Yeah, okay, you're right. Okay, that's what it is.
So, okay, still.
I have a problem.
The guy likes Stardew Valley. That's great. All right, cool. Let's see. Ryan, what you been playing this week?
I've been still cranking pretty hard on Madden Mobile 16, and I need to change what I said last week, because last week I said I felt like it was too centralized on, I guess, your awareness or like players awareness. So players have an awareness score, and they can predict what play is coming up next. And then you can also set up counter plays to, counter plays. Who'da thunk? So as you get further up, like in the skill ranking in the game, people get a lot better at figuring out what you're about to do. And it also becomes a lot harder to plan on offense. Like the defensive side, I felt like was pretty easy because you just try to counter what you think is going to come. But in like the lower levels, you have people who think like a 1st and 10 always means a run. Well, when you get higher up, that's not always the case. So it becomes a much, much harder to set up your counter plays, which I'm pleased with because, it puts more challenge in the game.
So what do you end up with? Like a lot of ties or draws or something?
Well, I mean, you have winners, but like when you play somebody head to head, you each get 3 drives and whoever has the most points at the end wins. But it's much harder to score. So whereas in the rookie levels, you do a run and then you do a couple pass plays and you're 80 yards down the field. Now that I'm higher up, it's much harder to move the ball down the field, and you have to, on the offensive side of the ball, now you have to really start thinking about what the defensive player is thinking that you're going to do. So now calling a run play on 1st and 10 isn't a good option all the time, because
right.
So it changed, and it changed the game, like how it works in my eyes. So I really like that. It's just becoming more of a challenge, and it's got enough other stuff around it. Like you get rewards that build sets that let you get players and that kind of thing. And gives me enough to do, like in my spare few minutes. If I don't have anything to do, I can pop that out and play it. And it makes me want to come back to it. So after that, I played Super Truck actually right before the podcast. Which was an April Fool's joke, and it's a spoof on, I suppose it's a spoof, but it's going to be a real game called Cluster Truck, but it was a spoof on Super Hot. So basically, Super Truck is a surfing game where there's a bunch of semis on a path, and you are jumping from semi to semi, but time only moves when you move, obviously, so the trucks are only moving when you're moving, and it kind of becomes this weird surfer platformer thing that becomes pretty difficult. And if you look at the Cluster Truck previews on Steam, like Super Truck is a preview for Cluster Truck, which is going to have its own unique maps and challenges and obstacles and that kind of thing. So that was really fun. I'm actually going to probably play it later today because it was super fun, super action packed, really short time to play it, which is what I like.
That's cool. I like it when the April Fool's Day jokes become their own full concept game.
Right.
Yeah.
When there's so much support behind them.
It reminded me of, what was the League of Legends one? The Rapid Fire.
Oh, like that one weekend where everything was like, what's that?
Ultra Rapid Fire.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah, so that was when in League of Legends, when they reduced the cooldowns on all the skills by an obscene amount. And so you could go in, I mean, you would have like 80% cooldown reduction and go in and use your ultimate every 20 seconds or something. And it just made crazy games. And that's another example of like just a really cool April Fool's concept that turned into something really popular that I know has remained popular with the player base.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Cool. Is anything else this week?
No, pretty busy week. That was it.
All right. Let's see. As for myself, I also did some mobile gaming. I love that company, Kairosoft. I think they make really good games, and they released one last week called Skyforce Unite, which is not the greatest game in the world. It's very there is a game that's almost exactly like this, and I just can't think of the name of it, but you're driving a plane on a map and you get 5 cards and you pick your card to move, and then you also use those to attack. There's something that is almost exactly that, but the name escapes me.
Hand of Fate?
No, it's not Hand of Fate. I mean, like, it is planes and a grid, and you use the card to move the planes and like change altitude and stuff like that. I just can't think of the name of it. Anyway, so it's a little bit inspired by that, and then also the whole kind of Kairosoft thing of training your guys and getting skills and blah blah blah. But the free to play stuff is just egregious. Like you use this currency called medals for basically everything. And anytime anything's on cooldown, anytime you want to do something that you don't have enough to do right now, blah, 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 etc. But here's the thing that was interesting is that the day I started playing that game, there was some kind of bug that made it think that you were logging in over and over again. So I've got like 800 days of login bonus medals. stacked up.
Awesome.
Right. So I've got the equivalent of like $80 or $90 worth of this premium currency. And so something about that has made me want to keep playing the game like I got one over on it.
That's how they get
and
you.
And I feel like if you were going to do some brand new, nefarious mobile gaming technique, that's not the worst way to do it.
Like, was it trick players into thinking that they got an error in their favor?
Yeah, something like that. Like, because there's also a subscription model to this game. Like, I'm telling you, the free-to-play stuff is absolutely terrible. But I love Kairosoft, and I'm sure their next game will be way better. Normally, it's flat $5, and you're good to go. But, well, there's been some other free-to-play ones. But anyway, this one, yeah. So what I actually bought a monthly subscription because it increased the amount that you get for every daily login. Mm-hmm. So when I got these 800 days, I got them as if I was a premium paying subscriber. So I've got just buckets and buckets of medals. And so I'm playing it because I feel like I exploited this bug. I've got this huge advantage. So like I should be playing this, right? Mm-hmm. It's not that it's a bad game. It's really not at all. It's fine for a mobile game, but it's not as good as their other titles. Anyway, so that was a compelling thing to me. Like I wonder if that is a new strategy, or I wonder if there's somebody over there who's extremely clever and thought of that. I doubt that it's true, but when you look at the effects that it had, I just think it's interesting.
Little tinfoil hat theory there.
Yeah, no, absolutely tinfoil hat theory, but that game's not terrible. Let's see. Also, I played the open beta for Orcs Must Die Unchained came out.
Oh, how is that?
It's fine.
Like the hesitation, it's fine.
Yeah, it depends. It's Orcs Must Die. I mean, basically, just a little. I'm not sure exactly how to describe it. It's almost like it's not a downgrade. That's the wrong way to say it, but it's less compelling than Orcs Must Die 1 and 2. Okay. It has a survival mode where you're basically playing the same game from back in the day, but with 5 players instead of 2, I think is what you got.
Okay.
And so it's got all this crafting stuff and all these cards and just all the weird free-to-play stuff that you've come to expect from everything like this. The part about it that I've been playing is a 5-on-5, almost MOBA-ish kind of variation on the Orcs Must Die formula. Mm-hmm. So in a MOBA, whereas they normally just spawn creeps, now you choose what creeps you want to spawn based on cards you put in a battle deck before you start.
Right.
And then you kind of follow them forward, work your way through, and try to push through their defenses, which they're building, spike traps and shock pits and arrow walls, all the really classic kind of traps from that franchise. And then you have somebody on your team doing the same thing. And so it's just an interesting take on the MOBA thing, I think. Mm-hmm. I think it needs a little bit of tuning, perhaps, but it's interesting. I've always been a huge fan of that art style. I like the big cartoony art style kind of thing. The giant shoulder pads and everything's real clunky and stuff.
Right.
So that really appeals to me. And the little touches, like anytime a minion gets shocked, they get the big white goofy eyeballs. And that's been just endlessly entertaining for me. I like watching that stuff. It's not going to top any charts. It's not going to break away. And right now, if you play 2 games in a row, you're going to get 8 of the people from the last game you play. I think the population is very, very low right now.
Is it just to the time, or is it just the concept of the game isn't very successful?
I'm just not sure if it took off. I'm just not sure how many people are playing it overall. And then you look at some of that free-to-play stuff, and I think you're looking at probably about $15 if you want to get a hero.
Damn, that seems pricey.
Yeah, that seems pretty steep. And then obviously you can craft it, but that's one of those things. It's going to take forever to try and get the materials. And what materials are dropping are just kind of random that you use for basically everything. They all take different whatever. I don't know. I haven't even looked at that stuff, to be honest with you.
Right.
But I keep playing it, and my theory is that I keep playing it because the population is so low that it's easy to be a big fish in a small pond. So whenever I play, I do very well. I get good scores, and we normally win the game. Like I'm dunking on people left and right because nobody's playing it. So I think that might be what the draw is for me right now. But it's not bad. It could be something interesting. But I guess my main point of contention is they took away the headshots. So if you don't get more damage for headshots, what is anybody even doing?
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's true. That's a fact of life.
That is a fact of life. That should be a staple, I think. Outside of that, I think that about wraps me up. I could browse through my Steam list, but I'm pretty sure that's between the Game Club games and all that. That's about what I've been playing.
Cool.
So let's slide on forward. Let's move into the topic section of our program. So continuing with our idea, since we're hitting a little bit of a topic drought, is to pull current items that are in the news, stuff that people are talking about, stuff that we think will spark a conversation. And to that end, we have selected a little bit of a kerfuffle that happened this week with Blizzard's Overwatch. And I'm not exactly 100% on the details here, but the way I understand it is a fan spoke out about a certain victory pose for the character of Tracer. And thought that it was inappropriate for the character, and Blizzard responded saying that they were going to change it, they were going to take it out of the game, and this has caused the most recent internet controversy. So I bring it to the table here, where cooler heads can prevail, and we can discuss what we think.
So who wants to go first?
That's your cue.
With an air of hesitation. I mean, I understand why Blizzard removed it, because at the end of the day, from a PR standpoint, it's just easier to take it out of the game than to deal with any potential backlash from it staying on there. But I can also understand why some people are also upset that it got removed to begin with, because it's that kind of mentality where I guess people feel that companies are bending over backwards to appease every single person there is. And, all it takes is, somebody complaining, and all of a sudden it's like, all right, fine, we won't add that in the game, right? Kind of thing. And it's kind of hard to explain without sounding like an asshole, because I'm not saying that we shouldn't respect people's opinions, but I guess the best way I can put it is that for April Fools, there was a joke going around, that petition to remove guns from Overwatch because somebody thought guns were offensive. And I guess that kind of ridiculousness is what I kind of attribute to changing a character's pose because somebody thought that it was too sexual for the type of character it was. So I don't know. It just seems like a weird thing.
Yeah, to me, it seems like, God, there's so many other instances in games where something much more grievous happens and nobody seems to bat an eye. And I guess for me, it's like I don't really care either way, because if they have that in the game, I don't think it's hugely inappropriate. I don't think it's a problem. But at the same time, when they remove it, it's not something that's so integral to the game that it's going to ruin it if it's not in there. So to me, it's like if Blizzard removed it and they're fine with removing it and it's not breaking the game in any way, I just don't care if it's not there.
Right.
Like that, I'm not playing that game just for that. So it's hard for me to not be totally apathetic to the situation.
Yeah, and I understand because but at the same time, there's just something that bothers me about. I don't want to say they're caving in, but it's just that you can't please everybody 100% of the time. And then I feel like sometimes when people get offended for certain things, they're kind of reaching a bit. And I know that's completely insensitive to say that, oh, well, you don't have a right to be offended. But I guess going back, because a few months ago, a similar issue happened to. There's a World of Warcraft. There's a ship in game called Tyrande's Silence, and Tyrande is the leader of the Night Elves, and it was a submarine. Which submarine's supposed to be stealthy, so I figured Tyrande's Silence was a fitting name. And somebody got offended because they said that, I guess in an instance a few months beforehand, there was a one line of dialogue where one of the characters said "hush, Tyrande," basically telling her to keep quiet. So they thought that, or they felt that because the ship was called Tyrande's Silence, it was in a way, I guess, celebrating that, and the concept of putting a woman in her place, and it was just, I don't know, I felt like a very thinly stretched argument, and I'm like, that just seems really weird. I'm sorry you feel that way, but I don't think that they really need to change this because of that really bizarre opinion. But as things happen, a lot of people started kind of going to both camps, and the conversation went from, okay, I guess I can kind of see where that's coming from, to just outright, you're either with us or you're against us, and it was either you're a feminazi or you're a misogynistic, patriarchal pig, and it just spiraled so out of control that Blizzard finally said, you know what? it doesn't take us that much effort to rename it. We're just going to do it. Don't worry about it. And going back to the whole like Tracer and like eliminating the pose that showed off her butt, like I feel like in a way it's almost like a backhanded way Blizzard's going about it. Because in the back of my mind, I just feel like there's some developers saying, you know what, you guys are being assholes about this. We're just going to take it away because you obviously can't behave yourselves. So I don't see it as a victory on their behalf when they remove Tracer's pose. I don't think it's something for them to celebrate saying, yay, like they're being considerate. I think it's some of them need to take a step back and think, you know what, they kind of just caved really quickly, almost like they didn't even want to sit down and have a conversation about this.
Yeah, it's caving into whining, I guess. I really don't think... I think there's a difference between complaining and whining. And it seems to me like this is an issue more of not that people wanted this in the game, but that Blizzard, a company who could very easily say, no, it's going to be in the game and not really suffer at all, caved into one person whining about it. And that's the real issue, because you have all these other mediums. You have TV, you have movies, you have music, and those mediums have infinitely worse things in them than, the topic at hand. And people complain about that all the time, but those things don't get changed because the creator didn't want to change that, and they wanted to uphold their vision of their creation. But in this case, you have somebody whining about something that's very insignificant. I think if you ask the majority of people, they'd say it's who cares. Nobody, no one cares. It's a video game. It's a pretty tame thing. And that's the issue. It's the censorship that comes from just one person whining. So it's like, well, what else are we going to lose from the genre? Because just because something offends somebody doesn't mean that it isn't valuable. And in this case, okay, this isn't valuable. Like a character striking a pose isn't valuable, really, but it could lead to further things in the future. So I mean that's kind of where I fall on it. It's just it's like
it's a weird.
It's just
it's
nonsense.
A weird position to defend too, which I think for me that's kind of the issue for me as well. That it's a weird position for me to say I don't think it should have been removed, and at the same time having to kind of throw a disclaimer that hey, I'm not saying this to be sexist, or I'm not saying this to be demeaning to anybody that held that opinion, but I don't know. It's just something weird about being in that position where you find yourself. You almost have to defend yourself, because I mean, at least specifically in this scenario, the issue that I had with it wasn't that they were questioning the sexualized pose; is that they were questioning the sexualized pose specifically for one character. There's, like, I think the Widow is another character in Overwatch, and she's got like that whole seductress kind of like Black Widow motif going on. So I think where the post originally said like, oh, if it would have been her, I wouldn't have cared. But this doesn't fit Tracer's personality. You don't need to be homogenizing and sexualizing every single female on the team. I'm like, that just seems like a really oddly cherry picked argument that this one character having this one specific pose is what offended you. And I don't know. It just there seemed like there was something more there. It was weird.
I'm not convinced that anybody actually... I think that people aren't concerned about the actual action. Except for the person who didn't like it. Like, they're probably the only person who feels strongly either way about what pose they leave in or what pose they take out. So everybody else is concerned with the implication. Yeah. They're concerned with what does this mean down the road? Where do we draw the line in the sand? Where does this stop? None of that stuff's guaranteed. None of that stuff is certain to happen if you open the door a crack. And so if these people are concerned with implication, but not concerned with the pose itself, then what does it matter if they change the pose itself? That's not what you're worried about. You're worried about what that's going to lead to down the road, which is nothing that you can prove, nothing that you can guarantee will happen anyway, one way or the other. It's Don't blow your steam on this one.
The slippery slope fallacy.
Yeah.
It's 100% a slippery slope fallacy. And in that case, if one person's unhappy, let them change the pose. Doesn't matter. Doesn't change the gameplay. All it changes is a little bit of the optics. Who gives a shit about the optics? Not me. I'm here for a video game, right? Does it still play the same? Cool. Change whatever you want. Don't care. They could all be flat sprites. Okay? So that part, I think, is fine. Change it for one person. Let's fight against the implications when it becomes a problem. Let's fight for something that matters and is important, like when they want to change balance or they want to change something that makes it less of a video game. I think that you're just wasting your time fighting about what could be when nobody has any idea how that's going to shake out. That's where I stand on it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think it's telling that Blizzard switched it so willingly, because I feel like if it was an integral part of the game and it was a part of their vision, they would have kept it in the game. But like we said before, it's such an easy thing to change just to avoid the negative press, and it has no impact on anything. I mean, if they changed it or removed it without telling anybody, half the people would notice. You know, I don't know. I just, like Sam said, I don't think you need to go off on this one. I think it's better spent. Your energy's better spent on topics like, you know, like when that whole thing with hatred was going on, and it's ultra violent video game and offended a lot of people. That's one I think that is worth discussing, because that is a core element of that game. The Tracer's pose is not a core element of Overwatch whatsoever.
But hatred is a little bit unique too, because, and nobody believed me when I said this when they first released the trailer, but those developers intentionally blew that out of proportion because they knew about the backlash that was going to essentially turn into free publicity for them. If anybody's actually played Hatred, the game is, I want to say, probably 20 or 30% as violent and gory as the trailer showed.
Okay.
Yeah, when that game hit, that whole veneer just instantly fell away, and you're like, oh,
and
I see
that's the
what
thing,
did,
though. Like,
right?
dude, this was a really, I still to this day think that was a very carefully planned out, you know, marketing technique, and I think that it's kind of weird because I feel like I'm gonna get hate mail for this, but I feel like in gaming culture, there's this very, very delicate PC bubble where I know gaming culture isn't perfect, and I know there's still a lot of resentment and sexism and discrimination, and I know it's something that we're working towards improving. But there's this very fragile bubble that's just ready to pop at any second over things. And these developers saw it, and they're like, you know what? Let's use it. And they intentionally released a trailer that specifically picked the goriest parts of the game and the most fucked up parts of the game to showcase it as we're tired of the PC culture. Check this game out, and they manipulated everything to the T. You know, they got the reaction they wanted. It got the free press. It got banned off Steam for a little bit. Got put back on, and then it got even more press. I mean, it was great. They were pretty much like the Donald Trump of video games for a bit.
But I mean, so much of that shit, that argument on both sides is founded on
actually, yes.
And what does this mean if we let this go? Start voting with your wallets.
Go back to the implication, because that's something I want to talk about. And that's the reason I brought up hatred. Not the implication in terms of what it means down the line, but more about the implications of what it actually means in the moment and about the subject itself. Because hatred, it was very specific because it was very intentionally marketed that way. So the developers, their implication was intentional. You know, they wanted that kind of reaction. And for me, it's kind of weird when, and I feel for the developers, it must be frustrating when people keep pulling these implications out, and as a developer, that's not your intention at all. So imagine how the guy that designed that pose must feel from Blizzard when, people are jumping down his throat saying, oh, this is sexist, it shouldn't be here. He's like, damn, that's not what I meant at all. It was just a pose, Yeah.
Well, it gets blown out of proportion. I think the original argument was just hey, this doesn't fit the character, or something he didn't want his daughter to, something about his daughter. I don't remember exactly, but he was like, this doesn't fit it doesn't fit the character, and I'm not comfortable with my daughter.
Yeah, which I mean, and I understand, but I mean, at the same time, the argument could be made. I think it fits her character perfectly because Tracer seems like a really spunky kind of, flirty, happy-go-lucky, laid-back person, and that's the kind of pose I would expect, just kind of leaning on one leg.
I think as a pose, it's lacking a little bit to begin with, just in itself. But that's neither here nor there. But like I said, I mean, it gets taken to an extreme, and it's hold the line here. This is where we have to stop this, but it's not. Every video game is not for everybody.
And like I said, from a developer standpoint, I mean, it must be frustrating when you realize that the stuff that you put effort into has to get taken away because it offended somebody when that wasn't your intent. And I understand having respect for when somebody's offended, having the respect to say, hey, I understand this is how you feel. I apologize. But I do think that it should also go both ways. And we should be able to say, hey, I got offended, but I understand that wasn't your intent. I'm sorry. But we don't ever see that part of the argument, It's always one-sided.
Or just, I never feel like creative vision should be compromised. I very much back creative people because I'm not one. I very much back creative people in anything they want to do and exactly how they want to do it. As long as you're being true to yourself and you're getting out that drive within you to make something, then just make it. Make what you want. And I mean, at that point, it's really on them, right? Do people buy it? Do people not? Do people get upset? Do they not? Right. That's all stuff that compromises your creative vision,
and I understand, I mean, at the end of the day, it was there was a lot more to it. It wasn't just a matter of saying, hey, I'm sure that the guy that designed it wasn't saying, hey, this is integral to my creative expression. This pose needs to be there. I mean, it was just a placeholder pose for a character for a game that's not even finished. So it was super easy for Blizzard to just say, hey, weighing the pros and cons, it's way more beneficial down the line for us to just get this out of the way. So no big deal. So, I mean, and that's fine.
Yeah,
I mean, it put them in a lose-lose situation, kind of, right? Well, maybe not. Maybe if they would have just left it, just never responded to that guy and just left it, it would have just fizzled, pop, gone. No, nobody ever knows that it was ever posted. It's possible.
I think with Blizzard, there was no downside in taking that pose out of the game, and there was there was only an upside to it because you have this. Even if it's one person, you have one person who's saying that they were offended by it, and in the current climate, that could easily snowball into something bigger, especially if Blizzard said, well, sorry, but we're not going to remove it. But the people who are going to play Overwatch, the people who are hyped up for Overwatch and are defending this pose, baring their teeth, are still going to buy Overwatch.
It's not going to make or break the game not having the pose on there, period.
Yeah, so they're not losing any players by doing this, and they're only gaining. Who's going to be the guy who's like, I'm not going to play this game because of this. I don't think there's going to be many of those. So I just, when people, Blizzard's kind of gotten a lot of backlash over it, and it's like, give me a break. What else are they going to do? Like, they don't care. They don't care if the pose is in the game or not. They care about not casting a negative shadow on their game. Yeah, that's true.
And at the end of the day, it comes down to, like, they weighed the pros and cons, and they had nothing to lose from taking the pose out, period.
But it's just another one of these. By the time this podcast comes out, it's going to be irrelevant that we're talking about.
I don't think people are going to remember it.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, it's just like this stuff doesn't matter. It really doesn't.
If you've made it this far into the segment, thank you. Because we're sure you don't care anymore.
You're probably like, what? When did that happen? Last year? No, it happened a week ago. That's like the pace. That's what I'm saying. The pace that things move at, that's just what people are upset about this week. That's just the way the internet is. It's a huge bummer. I don't know what to say about it other than that. But looking at it from that side, it's just whatever.
It's like for the people who are really invested in this one way or the other, I just feel like take a step back and look around and like put things into perspective. Like, is this really worth it? Is this,
or save your outcry for when it's something that matters, so that people see an outcry and react to it. There's an outcry over every other thing. The human condition says, okay, that's just what happens. No big deal. This happens every time. You need like a backlash to the extent of like, what do you need now? A nuclear bomb? Like it only escalates itself. Like if you want to make a change, no matter what side of the fence you're on, trying to push at everything will eventually lead to you pushing at nothing. So like wait for the big one and then let's fight that. And then I'm with you. I'll pick up my sword too. But this ain't it, folks.
Yeah. I think where I fall, I think it's unfortunate that we care so much either way. I think that's my closing statement on that.
I agree.
All right. Well, let's cruise on to our next topic.
Okay, so a topic that I've thought about a lot in the past is, and I know it's a very heated one online and different places, is first of all, are is playing video games professionally a sport? And second, are esports players athletes? So I'll start off with my opinion, just to get the ball rolling. Mm-hmm. I think you can classify anything as a sport. I mean, if you want to, we have things like poker as a sport, and so you can classify esports as a sport, which I'm fine with because it's a very fluid term. It's a very loose term.
Right.
I would hesitate to call it athletics, and I wouldn't necessarily call. I wouldn't call esports players. I wouldn't call professional athlete or professional video game players athletes because you have world-class athletes who compete in professional leagues all over the world. Mm-hmm. They put hundreds of hours a week, into perfecting not only a physical act, but an athletic act. Like that's the only way I can put it. Like it's an athletic, very physically demanding. And I know that esports is demanding in its own way. I know that a lot of people say there's, a lot of endurance, a lot of mental endurance that goes into it. There's a lot of mechanical endurance, but I can't, in my mind, I can't place somebody, sitting in front of a computer playing a game, no matter how demanding it may be in its own right. I can't put them in the same category as people who compete in the Olympics or compete in, the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball, that kind of thing. And for me, I may be a little extreme on this, but for me, that extends to things, even sports like golf. Like I think golf contains skills, but I wouldn't consider Tiger Woods like some
You don't consider him an
amazing. I mean, he could, I guess, athletic, but he's not the same athlete as players of other sports. It's not like I don't believe they can be classified as the same thing because fundamentally they're not. Fundamentally, sitting at a computer and doing all that, everything in that realm is fundamentally different than playing football or playing basketball or playing soccer.
Okay.
So, I mean, maybe it's an argument of semantics.
I think it is to a degree.
It totally is. Webster's dictionary defines athlete
as someone who is proficient in a sport. Yeah. No, but I do appreciate that you're at least consistent with your, I guess, views on it, because I've met so many people that, will say, oh, League of Legends or Dota 2 players or StarCraft players aren't athletes, but then they'll go around and say that, like, professional poker players are considered athletes kind of thing. So,
which, yeah, I would say a professional poker player, no, you're not an athlete, dude. You're a card player.
Yeah. But
calm down.
It does come down to semantics, though, because I can definitely see your point if you're speaking from a strictly physical, like the physical demands of it. And even...
Well, yeah, because in my mind, that's what separates a sport from something athletic, because you have to have that physical ability. And I don't, if you take, so here's a really good example. There's a small trend, but it's a trend of football players and rugby players going between both sports, or Canadian football players and American football players going between the sports. And they can, because of their physical and athletic ability, they can keep up. They might not have the skills conquered, but they can keep up, because they just have that ability. I would say no esports player is going to be able to keep up with, a middle linebacker.
Right.
It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It'll never happen. They're not going to be able to keep up with someone who plays basketball for 100 hours a week.
But those are very disparate circumstances. I mean, football and rugby, way more similar than Counter-Strike and American football.
Yes.
Yeah,
so
but
that's why they shouldn't be considered the same thing.
But by that same token, though, you could take a soccer player and put him in a court with a basketball player, and hypothetically, if you could teach him the skills, he would still be able to keep up on a physical level.
So it's like a cardiovascular thing, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and that's where I was saying that I agree with him if you're only looking at the physical aspect of it, where if all that makes an athlete is that physical requirement, then yes, I agree. But it becomes a little, I guess, the gray area and like the semantics come into term when you start applying like all the other like prerequisites for an athlete, which, like the long training hours, the skill set. And there's even a trend in Major League Gaming where there is a fallout age from, I think, 26 and onward, where your mind just doesn't have the reaction speed to keep up with the younger players anymore. I mean, that's something that I think there needs to be more research on it, but there are several cases of it where the average retiring age is 26, 27 because of that, because they physically say, hey, we just cannot keep up. So that does lend a bit of some kind of physical demand on it. It's the same way that you could argue that NASCAR drivers are athletes, because of there is a certain type of physicality that does come into play in that specific arena.
Yeah, and I want to make it clear, I don't want to imply all that I don't think that there's a tremendous amount of effort and ability and skill and practice and dedication that goes into esports, especially when you get to the top levels. Because that's simply not true, because those guys are extremely dedicated, and from what I've seen, they practice and, they practice and scrimmage and study just as much as any other professional athlete.
Sometimes they make it even more.
Yeah. And so like you hear about Korean players who are playing 14, 15, 16 hours a day, to maintain their spot. Well, no one else is doing that. No one. I don't want to say no one else is doing that. I'm sure professional athletes do that, but I don't think anyone is topping that. I think esports players are meeting the standard in that area very much so. But yeah, it's just.
What you have
where
a
do you draw
problem
the
with,
line?
I think, is a nomenclature kind of thing, like a naming convention sort of problem. For me, man, I think anything like if the best player in the world can beat somebody just starting, then you've got something like a sport on your hands, like something that requires dedication and you can advance in skill, and somebody can be better at it than somebody else. I think you got a sport. An athlete. I guess I would put athlete in the bucket of people who play sports.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like that's where like the semantics comes in. Cause like the definition of it, it's broken down to two parts. The first part refers directly to people that excel at the sport, but then there's also that secondary part, and athletics. And I think that's where the athlete, an athlete in football is not the same as an athlete in, Dota 2.
Right.
And that isn't to say that the amount of dedication going into esports is the lesser.
Oh,
it's
no,
just
no,
different.
No. Yeah,
it's
you're
just
talking
different,
about like levels of physicality and mental acuity and how those two things combine, and what's more mental of a sport and what's more physical of a sport. What requires you to have a stronger physical body frame? And I guess that's the kind of athlete stuff that you're looking at, like strong muscles, right? Like that's.
But at the same time, though, like
physical ability,
but the physical ability and requirements are directly related to the physical requirements of the sport itself. I mean, it's the same way that putting a boxer versus a UFC fighter, it's going to be a completely different matchup because the physical requirements are different for each field. It's the same thing with esports. Like they still exhibit the amount of dedication and drive that you would see in a professional football player. Like that drive that a professional football player has to sit in the gym for, like 12 hours a day to train their body up to that point. Those players exhibit in the video game sphere where they do have the dedications to sit there and learn the meta for every single character and counter strategies. And but it just comes down to the requirements of the sport that they're going for. So I think that's where like the physicality and the athletic aspect of the terminology for athlete gets kind of weird, because I think it's also that, we're in a time where esports are being considered a sport finally. So our definition of it is still a little bit archaic and it doesn't account for them yet.
And don't forget that the brain is the sexiest muscle in the body.
Damn shit.
There's also, I've also seen the argument, and I know Ryder even put out a video about this on Cloud9, the player Balls. He works out all the time. He's in very good shape. And they put a video out about it and how he talks about how he goes to the gym in order to improve his overall health, which in turn helps his ability to play League of Legends.
Oh, shit. So where do you land on that one?
So,
is he an athlete then?
Here's the thing. Then I go down to the requirements of the sport. Just because he's working out on the side and he is athletic doesn't mean his sport of playing League of Legends becomes an athletic sport just because he's in shape. Because when you're playing League of Legends, you're sitting in a chair, you are moving your fingers. So that's where I fall on that. It comes down to the actual sport. So if you have two people who work out for 5 hours a day in the gym, and then they go to their sports, one plays an esport and one plays soccer for 4 hours, and they both play, same amount of time, everything. The person who is playing the athletic sport is the athlete. The person who does not play the athletic sport is not the athlete, even though they're in the same shape.
Also a League of Legends player.
Yeah. So that's, I don't know. It's like, because I know a lot of people get really up in arms about it and very defensive about it because there's a stigma that playing video games is lesser than playing
like football,
athletic sports.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's the attitude that I don't like that much. The dismissive one that says, oh, of course they're not athletes because it's just a video game. Like it's not a big deal. Like I have a video game. I can play video games. Anybody can play video games. It's like, no, not like that. You can't.
Right. It's like you like, it's not even like you can't play it like that. It's like your brain is not working in the same way that professional video game player's brain is working.
Dude, that's why actions per minute are a thing.
Say it again?
That's why like the actions per minute are a thing when you're playing StarCraft.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And that's a tremendous skill. But like I've been saying the whole time, I don't think that's athletics. Athletics is a separate thing.
So what's lagging behind here? Is it our vocabulary that's creating this gap, or is it our perception?
I think primarily is attitude to say one is lesser than the other, because then you're just saying my preference is more important than your preference. If I like sports, that means your activity of video games is a lesser thing, when that's simply not true. That's a matter of attitude, and I think that's the main thing. That's the main problem, is how video games are stigmatized and how sports are held up for good. I think athletic sports are held up for good reason, and I think video games are stigmatized for bad reasons.
Yeah, and along with that, though, I think it's also something to do with the vernacular, because back in the day when we first came up with the concept of sports, it was directly tied to the physical activity. When we decided baseball was a sport, boxing was a sport, football was a sport, they were all physical activities, and that's all that we knew. And now that we have esports, and I think we can all agree that they're definitely a type of sport, we need to make room in the definition now that, hey, the word athlete came directly in regards to our definition of sport, which was directly influenced by the fact that it was only inclusive to physical activity. And now that we have another thing that fits in the umbrella of sport that isn't as physically demanding as you would, say football, I think that we don't have the vernacular to properly include in the definition now, because we're still thinking athlete equals physical activity equals these guys, not these guys.
Mm-hmm. When that's not true, because there's a lot of sports that don't require a whole lot of physical activity.
Yeah, so I mean, you could, if you're using the word athlete to simply refer to the people that excel at the sport, then by all means, yes, they're athletes. But when you start throwing that little caveat of athlete is specifically, referencing the people that have that physical prowess that allows them to play that sport, then you can start making that distinction.
Yeah, and I think going back to the stigma that comes onto video games, I think that is, I think that's why gamers get so outraged by it,
defensive,
because
and all that.
they want to say we are this is a sport and we are athletes, so that they meet people who play athletic sports. Why do video games have to be a part of that? Why can't they be their own separate thing that's appreciated as its own skill for what it is? Mm-hmm. Because I don't know, in my mind, it's a totally separate thing, and I think it needs to be looked at with a lens that is catered to that thing, not through a lens that is looking at college players to draft to their pro team. It's looking at players who are good at video games and who are good at maximizing those skills.
I'm going to stop it right there. And that will bring us to the conclusion, the dramatic conclusion, possibly, of episode 47 of the Select Characters podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in and listening this week. We do really appreciate it. The last order of business, as always, is to choose the game club for this week, and we're going to be playing The Magic Circle. This is an indie title where you are a part of a video game as it's being actively developed and sort of getting to know the people who are making it while you're playing it.
Yeah, well,
seems like...
Yeah, from what I gather, apparently you're a player in the game you're trying to release the game by finishing it from the inside.
So that sounds pretty cool. Should have some interesting narrative hooks. There should be a lot to talk about there. If you have any thoughts on the game club or anything else, please get in touch. We really want to have you guys chime in on the game club. Let us know your thoughts. Let us know what you think. You can send us an email, selectcharacters@gmail.com. You can stop by the subreddit, reddit.com/r/selectcharacters. And as always, cruise by the YouTube channel. We have videos going up. The game clubs show up there, as well as some occasional opinion pieces. And if you like the podcast, it's definitely worth your time. So check that out and keep tuning in. We'll be around. And other than that, we will see you next week.